the fetus may be a human, but it isn't a person. You do notice that because I'm looking at it, it's working. See, so this is, let's face it. All right, so the fetus may be human, but it isn't a person. In 2012, two ethicists wrote in the Journal of Medical Ethics, when, quote, circumstances occur after birth such that they would have justified abortion, after birth abortion should be permissible. Both a fetus and a newborn certainly are human beings and potential persons, but neither is a person in the sense of subject of a moral right to life. Peter Singer, who's an ethics professor at Princeton, is well known for having said that newborn children should not be declared legally alive until they're 3 months old, giving parents time to decide whether they want this child to live. Not just whether they want to place the child for adoption, but whether it should even be declared alive. And you see, it was very, very revealing that Peter Singer said that, because essentially he's doing exactly after birth what people are doing before birth. He's just arbitrarily, well, let's pick a number. As if your size and stage of development is what determines your humanity. So the argument is, well, the unborn child, and then I'm supplying, or other examples, for instance, slave or Jew. So think of the history of American slavery and other slavery around the world. Or think of the Holocaust and Nazi Germany and the Jew, the demeaning language, just simply the impersonal, inhuman language. While the unborn child is indeed a living human being, which science clearly confirms, he or she isn't a person, and therefore doesn't have the right to life. The 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Well, everybody, if you would have asked anybody back when the 14th Amendment was passed, what do you mean by person? It would be like, well, what are you even talking about? A human being. By definition, a human being is a person. It doesn't matter how smart or dumb they are, doesn't matter their disability, that's all irrelevant. Any human being is a person. The word person was synonymous with human being. So the conundrum, and this actually gets to some of the things that Chris was citing there, the conundrum of the U.S. Supreme Court Roe v. Wade decision, which in 1973 legalized abortion through 9 months, and this is how it was stated in actual language of Roe v. Wade. If the suggestion of personhood, and in context it's talking about the person of the unborn, is established, the appellant, and the appellant was making the pro-abortion case, of course collapses. For the fetus's right to life is then guaranteed specifically by the amendment, by the 14th Amendment. You see the point? In other words, if this is really a person, then we don't have any case at all to discuss. It's already been decided in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Therefore, the argument must be made persuasively. And apparently they thought it was persuasive because 5-4, they ruled, in favor of the, was that in favor of the plaintiff? The appellant, in favor of the appellant, I guess. Anyway, justices solved the problem by suggesting that personhood is different from being human, something developed at some point based upon some set of criteria such as viability, the ability to survive outside the womb. And pro-choice advocates have to center on subjective, artificial distinctions that say, okay, this isn't a person. Okay, so what happens when the preborn moves 18 inches or whatever it is up the birth canal and comes out into the world? Even though no bigger, no older, other than a few minutes older, what has fundamentally changed? Location. They've gone from one place to another place. They're outside instead of inside. In any arena, do we ever think that a person, that an entity is not a person inside, but when they go outside, they become a person? No. In fact, if we see a homeless person on the street, we say they don't even have a place to live. We don't say, oh, well, they can't be a person because they don't have a place to live. Location is not the issue. It's never the issue with personhood, yet the pro-choice advocate must argue that personhood magically comes into existence after birth. Now, most of them will say immediately after birth. Peter Singer will say, well, let's just call it wait 3 months. But don't we all know we're playing games? I mean, he's an ethics he's a lot, philosophy, one of the segments and courses in philosophy is logic. So you really, as a philosophy professor, you ought to be logical. An ethics professor should be logical. So why 3 months? Why not 2 months after birth? Why not 4 months after birth? Why not 1 year after birth? Why not 3 years after birth? In fact, if you're talking about inconvenience, first of all, it's always dangerous whenever a man talks about anything related to childbirth, okay? But I am who I am, okay? So I have to, say that I think it's fair to say that pregnancy and that as inconvenient as pregnancy is, and of course I know it is inconvenient, you can make a much better case for a child really turning your world upside down after they're born than before they're born, in most cases. Do you hear what I'm saying? In other words, if you're talking about that you should have the right to take the life of a preborn child because that preborn child has invaded your life, even your physical body, and that all kinds of problems and inconveniences you can experience as the result of your pregnancy. I'm not minimizing those, but I'm just saying the child now born crying through the night is surely just as much and probably more of a hindrance to you living a convenient life than before, right? So if convenience is an issue, or even how the child makes you feel, how the child makes you feel after the child is born, wow, and diapers to be changed and all the things that used to happen and they need to be fed and all of that automatically, not automatically, but superintended by God, was happening inside the womb, miraculously. Now it's happening outside the womb, and that's way more inconvenient. So again, why not, and let's go back to the teenager example. Okay, or the 6-year-old, or the 10-year-old, or any age. Well, what about viability? Viability is when the child can live without the mother, live outside the mother. No longer does the child can live on his or her own, and that's called viability. But think about this one. How viable is a 6-month-old? Leave them to themselves. Are they viable? How long will they live? Until they starve to death, or the weather affects them, or something happens to them, or they're not viable. They can't make it on their own long term, right? On their own, they can make it for a few hours, but they're not truly viable. If viable means you don't need another person to take care of you. How about a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old? Is a 2-year-old viable, or do they need an adult to take care of them? Well, don't they? You see how incredibly subjective and even contradictory a lot of the reasoning is. Any questions at this point? Or comment? Yeah.
Could you comment on this overlap of abortion and infanticide?
Yeah. Well, there's a number of ways you could approach that, but abortion and infanticide and how do they relate and the overlap? Well, first of all, if we're thinking clearly, then all abortion is infanticide. So you can call it a subset or whatever you want to call it, but it all abortion is infanticide. Now, not all infanticide is abortion. So the child is now born, and then a decision is made to take the life of this child. And it is murder. And if it's deliberate and premeditated, it is first-degree murder, and pretty much everyone agrees on that, right? So you read the accounts in the newspaper, infanticide, somebody kills, whether it's the father, the mother, or any other human being, they deliberately kill a child who is born, even if they were born yesterday or 3 hours ago. So we all agree it's infanticide. Even pro-choice people agree that it is. But the same child, just a little bit earlier, could be killed by abortion up until, third trimester abortion, and under Roe v. Wade, there's certain stipulations that are in there, but it all amounts to it is illegal to take the life of the child all the way up until birth, and a lot of people say no, it's not. And even the partial birth abortion discussion, which is amazing, because it's this child in the sense of what people mean by viability, which is inconsistent, but this child is viable. But by definition, this child is being pulled through the birth canal and dismembered. There are something like 1 million people waiting to adopt. This woman will not have to be pregnant one more day. The child is being taken out of her. This is third trimester, partial birth abortion. This child could live, but this becomes the right to have a dead child. Not the right to no longer be pregnant is one issue. But this now is not only the right to no longer be pregnant, which you're no longer pregnant once the child's taken from you, but why couldn't that child be allowed to live? And a lot of the logic is because that child doesn't belong to an adoptive family. That child belongs to the person who's choosing to get to the abortion. But do we believe belongs to, like legal ownership of not just this is my legal child, but I have the right to take the life of that legal child of mine? No, we don't. We don't recognize that. So infanticide and abortion, logically, you have to move toward devaluing the life of a born child as a result of devaluing the life of a preborn child. Same thing with child abuse. Okay, if it is perfectly fine to take the life of a preborn child right up until the day, the hour, the minute that this child is born into the world, that's your legal right. Well, how bad would it be if a month or two or a year or two after that same child is born, you just slapped him around? I mean, at least you're not killing him. Before it was fine to kill the same child. Do you get the logic here? Where this takes you? You have to devalue life when you of a born person. Anytime you devalue the life of an unborn person, because now what you're saying is size, strength, vulnerability, ability to fight back and resist matters when you're a human being. But intuitively, don't we know, and doesn't Scripture tell us, and doesn't even our society tell us, that when people are small and weak and vulnerable, do they deserve our protection less or do they deserve it more? What's the answer? They deserve it more. Don't we all know that? My friends who are professional football players, if you saw somebody coming and taking them on, especially some of the linemen I know, you would not really feel like you need to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, defend the rights of the poor and needy. Because you're looking at them and you're going, they can take care of themselves. But when it's a little child, you would be right there, I hope. If somebody starts beating up on that child, are you kidding me? So, yeah, I mean, does that connect at all with what, or you want to develop it further?
Yeah, I wanted to hear your argument
Yeah.
for this because, you know, folks who are also pro-choice are trying to morph the definition of infanticide.
Mm-hmm.
And would like to see infanticide have a time definition. So, you know, for the first year, it's okay.
Yeah, that's exactly the Peter Singer thing. Yes. So he's a pioneer in that. Right. I mean, so we will, it's okay in the early months and years to kill the born child, but whoever would have thought of that, if not preceded by, therefore logically, since it's okay to kill the child right up until the time they're born, laws protect this, then what's the big deal if it's after birth? And I think it's a good reminder for us because seriously, what actually happens at birth? Is there a fundamental change in the identity of this individual at birth? Well, of course there's a change in location, there's a change in the mother's no longer pregnant and all of that, but in terms of the child, what's the difference? So ultrasound, embryology, you know, have really put pro-choice people on the defensive. So the new strategy is, okay, this is human life, but it really isn't a person. So questions to ask. Is it human? That is, did it come from human beings? Is it a genetically unique individual? Is it alive and growing? And I added this in. I was quoting somebody else earlier, and I'm trying to remember if this is Scott Klusendorf or who. It seems like the source has been cut out of this, but I added, is it not an it at all, but a he or she? I mean, the gender has been established since, the gender is built into the DNA. I mean, it's been established since the beginning, since conception, but it's even been able to be visibly confirmed very early in the first trimester. So now these are, I love 3D and 4D. 4D is kind of a, you know, a misnomer, but it just means an advanced 3D ultrasound image. And you can just look these up online. But this is what you can see now. And when I first wrote my book, Pro-Choice Answer, or Pro-Life Answers to Pro-Choice Arguments, all we had was the, I'm trying to remember the term, the type of, intrauterine photography. All there was Leonard Neeson and others had done this intrauterine photography, and it is amazing stuff. But now, for a while, one thing that's interesting, when 3D ultrasound first came out, some entrepreneurs were doing 3D ultrasounds in malls for pregnant women. So it was like, come on in, and if you're pregnant, we'll give you a picture, and not just your gray, black and whitish ultrasound, you know, low res image. We'll give you a high quality image of your preborn child. Guess who some of the most outspoken people were to make that illegal for malls to do that? The abortion lobby. Why did the abortion lobby not want people to be able to, in a mall, get an ultrasound. Why?
They'll lose money.
Well, they'll lose money if people change their mind, but also people will see what? I mean, is there anything about that doesn't look like a baby? How about there? See the thumb sucking? See the smile? See that child? And somebody can say, technically, that's not a smile. That's just whatever. That, if the child was already born, you'd say it was a smile, but clearly, look at that. Oh. That child looks delighted. And generally, children in the womb are happy. And I know years ago, so many years ago, since my oldest daughter just turned 38 and the other's 36, we were reading the books and we were playing classical music and we were, and we did sense that, yeah, okay, so obviously we can they hear through a pretty thin layer of skin? Well, sure they can. Like you can hear noises when you're underwater. And so they're hearing this and sounds, and so people talk to their preborn children. Sucking your big toe, how's that? And look at that tongue, sticking out. I mean, okay, so folks, this is what we're talking about. And this is where had these images been available in 1973, when Roe v. Wade was put into effect, I think it would have been, it might still have happened, but I think for society as a whole, the level of denial could not have been as great as it has been. And now what people are doing is they're clinging to an old concept that is so obviously, even on face value, disproven by looking at these children. Look at the twins there on the left. And look at this child. I mean, it's just, please. It's almost like, let's move on to the next subject. I mean, are we really talking about whether these are human beings and whether they have a right to live? Yes, we are. Look at facial resemblances. Look at, say, the born child has a hand up to the forehead. The unborn child has an. Which one of these is a child?